Christopher Nolan interview because
Hi.
I think it's
Hello, Mr.
really
Nolan.
good.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Well, filmmakers are bards of the modern age, just like the Greeks know of Odysseus, Achilles, Agamemnon because of Homer's narratives. We know of the Batman, the Joker, and Oppenheimer because of your narratives.
There you go.
And Homer tells stories of distant past. You too. The Trojan War happened between 12th to 11th century BC, but Homer lived in the 8th century BC, so that's a long time ago. But Homer's time was a time of rise. It was a time of civilizational rise. The Greeks were prospering as a culture. The economy, the books, the thinking, everything is on the rise for a couple of hundred years, really until the 5th century BC. So Homer's tone was celebratory.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
victorious. He
Very,
celebrates
very big
the
tone.
victory of the war.
And this is
your
noted by a
tone
lot
is
of translators that they
emphatically
critiqued.
not.
I
guess
critique this
my
about
first
Christopher
question
Nolan.
is, does that say something about our age? Are you a bard for a civilization at dusk?
I think that's a really interesting point, a really interesting.
No, it's a fantastic question. She's doing a better job. I'm sorry. It's really bad whenever Eastern countries do a better job at representing the West than Western countries do. Interviewers here in the United States, interviewers in UK and Europe and all that other stuff, they don't do as good a job as asking questions like she just asked. She just called him out in the most neutral, positive manner that you could call someone out on.
Question. I mean, underlying the main part of the point is this 400-year or so gap between the events that Homer is describing and when Homer's story was written down or first received by readers and audiences. That's a pretty interesting gap. And for me, I don't think I'm completely at odds with the way Homer's telling the story when you look at it from a sort of historical perspective. And the reason is, and what I got interested in, as I adapted it, is that Homer's writing about an era before his. He's writing about an era hundreds of years before that his audience viewed as being more advanced than theirs. So they were a civilization on the rise, but they were trying to get back to where they'd been 400 years before. So that idea of a cycle, that idea of, as you say, a civilization at dusk, I think it's there in the poem. It's subtle, but when you look at the history as well, and you look at the idea that, when they would unearth these walls of old palaces that were crumbled, they called them Cyclopean walls because they thought only a giant could have built such grand walls. They had this idea of the greatness of this past civilization. And so I became interested by that collapse, that what they call the catastrophe, the Bronze Age collapse, what happens between the events of the Trojan War and Homer. And so, I think it's something that from a modern perspective it's frightening and interesting and intriguing. And I think for me, it partly comes out of having worked on Oppenheimer before this, which is very much a film about the end of the world, about the end or collapse of civilization ultimately. So I think, I definitely carried that sensibility into this adaptation of the Odyssey.
His ability to focus so much on the collapse, I think, is the biggest downfall, is because he's focusing, and it says it perfectly right there. This is more of a reimagination of Homer's Odyssey rather than an adaptation, because she points it out perfectly that Homer's writing about the rise and the kind of the celebration of civilization, the celebration of what made civilization what it is. Whereas like Christopher Nolan took it as the collapse. Instead of celebrating it, he says that's the exact reason why they fell. And that's just not the case. And that's why whenever you're watching Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, it literally is inconsistent and fights with itself because the themes that it's trying to tell you and the foundations of what it was written on they don't mesh. And because of that, they collide. And it doesn't give for a authentic experience.
That captured me was that the concept of atonement doesn't exist in Greek culture. It doesn't exist in the Greek language. It doesn't exist in Homer's Odyssey.
Damn, dude, this girl's cooking.
It exists in your Odyssey.
Shit,
an
dude.
actual question that I had when watching the film was, did you Christianize the Odyssey?
Ooh.
Do you think that why did atonement become important for the coming of catastrophe?
God, that is such a
I think
good
it's a really
freaking
good question. I wasn't too conscious in.
Now, when she says, "Did you Christianize the Odyssey?" I think a lot of people don't realize if you live in a Western culture is built off of Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian values. So if you are friends with someone, or if you know someone, or if you see someone online that says they're an atheist, they don't believe in God, or let's take it a step further, not just that they don't believe in God, but that they despise Christianity. They think Christianity's stupid and that Christianity's not a thing, or that it shouldn't be a thing, or that they don't follow Christianity. Matter of fact, a lot of woke people. Let's look at the left. Let's look at a lot of woke people right now. I'm talking about the radical left. I'm not talking about liberals. Liberals, for the most part, are fine. But if you look at those people, they are very anti-Hitler. So they worship their ideologies. They've self-baptized themselves. And the issue is, you're still a cultured Christian. You're still raised in a society that has Christian values. Whether you like it or not, you are still upholding a lot of Christian values, regardless if you see yourself as a faithful Christian or not, or an atheist, or someone who is woke and you're waiting for woke 2.0 to show up. These are things, this is kind of what's important here, is that when someone like Christopher Nolan, who is adapting something and who is trying to put their own spin on it, this is what it means. They will insert their own ideology. So for her to say, like, did you Christianize the Odyssey? He totally did. He totally did. And because he was so far off the plot, he didn't even realize. I think he realized what he was doing. I think he realized he was doing those things, but I don't think he just that's so beautifully said. Christianized. I don't think his intent was to Christianize the Odyssey, you know? But to say something like that is she's so smart. That is such a smart question. This is one of the best interviewers I've ever seen. Oh no's, Hollywood pushing Hollywood metrics. I know, right? It's surprise, surprise. What? Oh, dude, there's another analogy for that I can't think of right now.
How I was approaching it philosophically, other than I really honed in on the idea of what's termed xenia.
He did. And I said in my review, I know. I'll stop. I'll write it down. I'll write it down.
Mutual respect, that I treat you the way I want to be treated. And in their theology, it's because you might be a god in disguise. So I really drilled down on that, and I started to realize that for me, a lot of what's interesting about the interaction of history and mythology is this idea of the sea peoples, is the idea of the people from the sea who were thought to have precipitated the Bronze Age collapse.
So he's about to switch subjects here. So on the whole thing of Xenia, I said in my review, I talked about how Xenia, the way he portrayed Xenia is not how Zeus portrayed Xenia, or Zeus. It's not how Homer portrayed Xenia, and that like Xenia was essentially justification for fucking up anyone that didn't follow the law. So like the Cyclops, for example, it was to keep people civilized and to keep them from acting selfish against one another. Xenia was a way that showed you were a God-fearing man, and being a God-fearing man was super important. In the Homer's Odyssey, the Cyclops literally laughs and says, we are not God-fearing men. We laugh at Zeus when he drops the storm on us. We do not care. And because of that, they do whatever they want. So they'll eat people. They'll treat people unkindly. They will lie. They will cheat. They will steal. And that's exactly what the Cyclops does. I am not the only person who criticized. I was the first to criticize him about it. I will say that much. I was one of the first people to criticize him about his Xenia law in my review. And then Emily Wilson came out after I said it, and he based his movie off of Emily Wilson's book, which I cross-referenced and studied as well, which is why I know so much now, because I spent over 20 hours researching the subject to prepare for the movie, to tell a review, I'm not even going to get into that next part. But, oh my gosh, these cats are going insane today. This is a different cat now jumping on my desk. And basically, Emily Wilson said the same thing, that he's misinterpreting Xenia. And these things that he focused on, he misinterprets them, he changes them, and he honestly, he bastardized them.
It's one of the great mysteries of history of like, who were they? But the idea that really a violation of Xenia, a violation of Zeus's law, which is what the suitors are doing in the palace.
Yep.
That really, it's that break of Zeus's law that is
Oh my God.
causing this difficulty and this damage.
Oh my God, I'm
idea
so
of
glad he
atonement,
says this.
in a way, is what we bring as viewers to the story.
I'm so glad he said that. I haven't really seen this interview, so I'm so glad he said what he just said, because in my review, I said, why are the suitors not punished by Zeus? Why are the suitors not punished by God? Why are the suitors not like exiled or treated differently? There's an inconsistency. If he believes in this Xenia and he says that this is the fall of man, the whole point of Xenia is not when you break it, it collapses society. The whole point of Xenia is to uphold society. And that is the story of Homer. And so he's basically inverting it. And this is what Christopher Nolan does. And this is what when I watch some of Christopher Nolan's movies, it bothers me. This is exactly what bothered me about Dark Knight Rises. When Christopher Nolan did Dark Knight Rises, he's over here telling us Gotham doesn't need Batman, but then does an entire movie where Gotham needs Batman. And it's just like, he does this thing where it's like, he goes, what if the good guys were the bad guys? Like, that's what Christopher Nolan does. He's just like, oh my God, what if the good guys are the bad guys? Someone write that down. Someone write that down right now. And all these people that love him and think he's just good at writing, okay? He understands how to make something compelling. And so he basically tricks you into thinking his weird, not so deep subversion is actually super complex and super thought-provoking, when all he's doing is, what if the good guys are the bad guys? The whole point of the suitors breaking Xenia are so that Odysseus is justified in coming back and slaughtering all of them. And it's like 100% base. And then you have Hollywood coming in and being like, no, it's actually gonna bring about the fall of the Bronze Age. So we actually need to just like be good to each other and stuff. And like, they totally Christianized it. They totally bastardized it. He's not making a good defense for himself, because he's only proving that he was inconsistent with his own film.
I don't know whether there really is atonement in the film, or whether we just feel that's the catharsis, or that's the process we're seeing in the final meeting that we've waited for.
No, there's no catharsis. We're not waiting for it.
We may be bringing our more modern sensibility to that.
He's saying it's not me, it's you. He's saying you're projecting. He's actually saying you're projecting. Oh my gosh, dude. You know what's really stupid? When the hero who doesn't want to go home gets exiled from his homes. That's really stupid. That's really dumb when the hero actually gets what he wants at the end of the day.
But I think it's a very interesting question. And insofar as it's there, it's not a deliberate attempt to, for example, Christianize it, but
I told you.
It's a natural conclusion of burrowing in on this philosophical idea of what happens when you break Zeus's law.
You know what happens when you break Zeus's law? Odysseus shows up, slaughters you, tells all the maids who slept with you to clean up the body and the blood so his wife doesn't have to see it, and then he kills all the freaking maids while calling them whores. That's what happens when you break Zeus's law. That's what happens, all right? Not this, the Bronze Age is over. I must be exiled now. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm such a terrible person for tricking the Trojans. I must atone. I must repent. These are Christian values.
I guess from what you were saying, the connection between atonement, which is the perspective of a Christian world, and Xenia, which is the perspective inherent in the Greek world, what connects them is the fact of war. What is the response to war.
Atonement, the appropriate response to war.
You still want to say that the presentation is inherent in the Greek mythological worldview, that war happened when hospitality or xenia is broken.
I think so.
You stole someone's
sometimes
wife.
It's difficult to draw a line, and I think academics often maybe are too dogmatic in drawing a line between different philosophies and as they evolve historically, because I think I was more interested in the commonalities, because one of the things I found is that once you ignore the theological
Did you really
underpinning
just
of
say
Xenia,
that they're too dogmatic?
what you realize is that it is what we in modern terms call the golden rule, this idea of treat others
Treat
as
others how you treat others. Yeah,
has
I
never
agree.
really changed over time.
I agree.
The reasons that we try to hold people to that might have changed, but the idea itself hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And what I came to think is that what the
I think he's
poem
right
to me
about
is
that.
saying or inspiring me is the idea of civilization depends on this rule, and possibly is even defined by it. And that to me was a really interesting thing to realize. That this ancient text, to me, speaks directly to the modern world, because I think we live in a world where the concept of xenia, the concept of mutual respect, is more challenged, I think, than it's ever been, in more obvious ways than it's ever been. And I think we see the negative effects of that in terms of what defines civilization, what binds us together.
Right. Here's another Greek concept that is challenged in our world: hubris.
He has a way of not really answering the questions, and it's kind of annoying. I get what he's saying. Like, I agree with him. I do think xenia and is a form of the golden rule, and that it's something that we partake in as well. I do not agree that I don't agree that his movie portrays xenia and what if we break these rules? What if these, because he himself doesn't even follow that golden rule within his film. That the film has no lesson. The film is so subversive, it subverts itself. How can you say it was wrong to trick the Trojans, but then the Trojans stole the Spartan, or the Spartan wife went to go commit adultery with the Trojans, or not? And then how could you say the suitors get off scot-free, but then Odysseus has to be exiled? How can you say that Circe can poison people because she just assumes they're going to rape her, and so she poisons and hurts everyone? How can you say how can you justify these things? How can you justify the Cyclops eating and murdering people in response for people entering his home, and them doing so out of goodwill or good? Even in Christopher Nolan's movie, it was out of goodwill, right? It was out of xenia. How can they were going to offer him gifts in return for eating his cheese? So how you can't sit here and tell me that these people are too dogmatic when you yourself are so fixated. You can't sit here and say, oh, you know what? I messed up, or I captured something wrong, or I did this. Of course, you're not going to say that because you don't want your movie to get you're not going to talk shit about your own movie. But how are you going to sit here and your own movie can't even follow its own rules? And you're going to go here and call other people dogmatic, but unable to explain what it is about them that's dogmatic.
There's another. You've already started to complain about academics, and I feel like the next question will expose me even more. There's another great book written by another great man. Thucydides' Peloponnesian War also has a central theme on the hubris of the Athenians.
Yeah.
He blamed the fall of the greatest civilization in the world, Athenian democracy, on the hubris of the Athenians.
There you go.
Your film centralizes on the hubris of one man, the human pride of one specific man. My question is, should Odysseus repent for his human pride? Maybe pride appropriate for a great man?
Oh, shit, dude. She's cooking.
I suppose the question could be asked, what difference would it make if he repented? That's the interesting thing about these philosophical approaches, is that his repentance would be purely internal.
Dude,
it would purely
he's
be for his
getting
own,
cooked by her.
Spiritual self. it wouldn't necessarily affect anything outside it because the damage is done. Xenia is broken. Maybe for
It's
all
not
time.
broken.
I mean, that's the interesting thing.
It's
think,
not broken. You can still
that is the
uphold
thing
it.
About hubris. That is the thing about it's tragic because it's irreversible. Essentially. And that's what,
Wow, he is really exposing himself right now. Homer wrote, I'm going to say it right now. Homer's Odyssey is the superior text. Christopher Nolan, I don't think he tried to say it was better. I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to say that Christopher Nolan's movie is better than Homer's Odyssey. Completely disagree from this right here.
Christian theology.
This response right here says it all.
In a practical sense, doesn't necessarily change
Yeah.
what's happened, and therefore, in storytelling terms, isn't necessarily relevant. That's when I say
Okay.
we bring our understanding.
Yeah,
to
but
it,
you
so
can
we
make the
feel
change happen.
that there's catharsis.
Just like how Odysseus killed all the suitors in his house and upheld Xena through his own house. Just like how the suitors Trojan horsed themselves into Odysseus's house, and then he Trojan horsed himself into the Trojan horse, and then he killed them all. It's Trojan horseception, okay? This is right up your alley, Christopher Nolan.
Just because there's confession, because there's honesty and intimacy between Odysseus and Penelope, and that was very important to me, and I'm very invested.
This
in that
one skipped
emotionally.
math and went straight to
But
ethics
if
and
it has a practical
philosophy.
effect, and the collapse is coming anyway. The catastrophe is coming. What difference does it make for your pants? That's the interesting thing. Are we
You're gonna get me
concerned with
canceled,
his
bro.
spiritual well-being, or are we concerned with the world that he lives in and the world that in some sense he feels he's damaged?
We live in an age that demands apology from greatness.
Yeah.
God, she's
Great
so
storytellers,
fucking
when they
smart.
portray greatness, Homer celebrates it. We circle around it, we dance around it, we turn greatness into privileges, and we demand apologies for it. That's a fact of Hollywood.
Oh my
Just
God!
wondering if, as one of the greatest storytellers of our age, how do you approach greatness? Is it still a
Oh
story
my
of
God,
tolerance
dude,
and
she is-
demand-
I'm so glad she skipped math. Holy crap! Dude, I hope that one day I can be this is my dream right here. Look, Sean Evans, I think there's here, this is the scale right now, okay? This is like everyone else. This is every other Hollywood, TMZ, blah, 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 interviewer, YouTube interviewer. Then there's Sean Evans, right? He's like 10 steps above everyone else, doing hot ones, doing it while on the wings, right? And then there's this girl. Holy shit. I want to be on her level. This is one of the greatest interviews I've ever seen. She is attacking him without attacking him. How do you even do that? How do you even do that? She's just asking everything in the form of a question. It's so brilliant.
repentance and reflection and self-criticism.
Well, I think that when you're talking about storytelling,
Holy
you're
crap,
always
she just
in
called out
conversation with
Hollywood.
the expectations of the audience. So it really is an energy that's brought from the audience as well as an energy that's put forward from the.
Is he
story itself.
seriously
So when
constantly?
you're characterized,
Dude, I'm so sick. He's like blaming the audience. Is this literally how they think in Hollywood and in video game industry? They literally just blame the audience for everything?
somebody, and the trite version of this, or the criticisms often leveled at movies in general is, oh, the character has to be made sympathetic, so the character is
No.
manipulated in different ways or changed
No,
different ways.
you have to make the character empathetic, not
That's a
sympathetic.
fundamental flaw of film criticism in a way, or storytelling criticism, because to be able to identify the mechanism does not invalidate the mechanism. And that's
To be able to identify the mechanism does not invalidate the mechanism. That's stupid. You know what's so funny? He's identifying the mechanism and attempting to invalidate it. So in his own, like, he's literally doing the thing he says is wrong. He's criticizing critics by identifying a mechanism that critics do and invalidate it. Oh my God. I just can't. I can't right now. I really can't, dude. I'm actually so glad this interview exists. I'm so glad someone is making this, is showing. I am so glad this interview exists.
A real problem in criticism today, because people have this idea that because I can understand why the story affects me the way it is, therefore it didn't work.
Narcissism is a hell of a drug. Dude, you're telling me. Holy shit. I used to be a narcissistic asshole. I'm not going to lie. I used to be a narcissist. It's going to sound super corny. It's going to sound really dumb. I struggled. My entire 20s was me struggling with narcissism and not realizing it. And it wasn't until I became more of a cultured Christian that like I realized how narcissistic I was. And I was like, oh my gosh, wait a second. This is actually what it means to be selfless. Before I wasn't being selfless. I was doing things to look good. I was virtue signaling. I wasn't actually being virtuous. And it's such a small dial change, but makes such a big difference. Understanding why the story affects me the way it is, therefore it didn't work. I get what he's saying. Here's the problem with what he's saying, because he's not technically wrong. What Christopher Nolan is saying is like, I'm gonna dumb it down to layman terms. Like whenever there's a girl, let's say like I'm playing Halo, right? And Cortana gets turned into a transgender man. I don't agree with transgender men. I don't agree with Cortana looking like a dude. I don't want to see Cortana put on a fake penis, okay? What that is, that I understand why I don't like it. What Christopher Nolan is saying is therefore I am wrong to criticize it because there is an aspect in the game that I understand that I don't like and there. So he's correct because all I'm doing is I'm reciprocating my feelings, and my feelings don't matter. My opinions don't matter. Objective evidence should matter. So instead of saying, oh, I don't care what the story says. I don't care how the story is being portrayed. I can sit here and say, Halo has never been about transgenderism. Halo has always been about military conflict. Cortana has always been eye candy. Cortana's always been naked as a female in front of everyone. Cortana's always been confident, smart, and sexy. I can say these things, and I can say you're being inauthentic. Regardless of how I feel about it, regardless if I enjoy, if I'm happy, if I'm like, yes, transgender Cortana, woohoo, yeah, baby. Even if there's things that I enjoy, that I like, if it is not authentic to what it's supposed to be, I'm going to criticize it. Is there an example of something that I like, that I criticize, that I talked about? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. It's a lot easier to criticize things that are in the wrong. I would have to. It's because I know this is going to sound super pretentious. This is going to sound so fucking crazy, but like I don't care. I've studied so hard how to be a writer, and I've studied so long on like objectivity and then like logic and how to be a critic and remove myself from the situation to the point where like that's just become my personality, to where like for the most part, if something's good, I'm just gonna like it, and if something's bad, I'm not gonna like it. There are instances where like I can say something's good, like Spider-Man Homecoming. I can say that's a good movie, but I don't like Spider-Man Homecoming. I think it's too gay. But I can still objectively talk about that movie. Christopher Nolan is assuming that when I criticize Spider-Man Homecoming, I'm going to give it less points because I think it's more gay, when that's just not the truth whatsoever.
That's not how storytelling works. So when we create a heroic figure in a story, as storytellers, we have to be mindful of the energy that the audience brings to that story and the interaction.
He's not wrong. But here's the problem. You know what? Oh my God. I see what he's doing. Remember when Christopher Nolan said that he was making this for the modern audience? This is this right here. He didn't want to make a Chad movie because Hollywood and like being woke is what's popular and what's acceptable. He's literally using the excuse that I had to be mindful of the movie that I was making because I knew a bunch of woke fucking retards were going to watch this movie. Oh my gosh. He's just saying it in an elegant way. He knew his audience and he played his audience. And you know what? He made $1 billion from it.
Between our intention and the way the audience receives that. And the fact that that mechanism is identifiable to people doesn't invalidate it. And part of that mechanism is saying, are we going to treat greatness as an absolute or coming from a democratic, coming from a more idealized philosophical state that we live in today's world where we want to view people as equal? Do we have to apologize for that greatness? And the answer is yes, we do, or the audience rejects the greatness. And that is part of the mechanism. Once again, the fact
I'm very happy that he answered that question. He's not wrong. Here's the thing. He's talking about this from a very sympathetic point of view. He's literally talking about this like he's making this for the modern audience.
The fact that the mechanism is identifiable doesn't mean that it's invalid or shouldn't be used. And so for me, as we talk about it, this is none of these things are things that I try to be conscious of when I'm writing or self-conscious of. But as we talk about it, we of course realize is that my attempt to do that is to retain it within the philosophical surrounding of the breaking of Xenia that I have found interesting in the story. So I'm trying to be true to the thematics of the story.
As
I create a character that the audience can invest in and can feel satisfied by.
You failed. No, you failed at that. You failed because you are so concerned with making sure the audience resonates with the movie. You portrayed Xenia in an inauthentic manner.
As you were speaking, first of all, I like how you dragged film critics down the water as well as academics. But I just realized filmmakers, in a way, have it much harder than poets because poems can only be read in a language that is the culture in which it is written. You know, you can't read Shakespeare really, and not in English, or Goethe, not in German. But filmmakers have to speak to audiences outside of his polis, people who don't speak their language, and you come to a place with people of different
you don't have to.
Customs.
No, you don't have to. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, no. I mean, I disagree with what she's saying here. Like, you don't have to. If you're an American making an American movie, just make it for Americans. Like I don't care. I literally played Black Myth Wukong. It did not cater towards Americans. It catered towards Chinese, and I was totally. I think it's beautiful. It's better if you do it that way because then you allow other cultures, other people, other societies to experience your culture, to experience how you view the world, to experience those things, and it helps bring an understanding and allows people to empathize better with one another. I think this idea that like, oh, if I'm going to say something here, I have to be aware of some dude in China. No, that's just stupid. That's a globalist mentality that I just don't agree with.
And you don't put them into consideration.
No, but the
you shouldn't.
thing about film, and this is, when I was talking about film criticism, I was talking more about amateur film criticism.
I called it. He's literally just talking about freaking people online that are just talking shit about his movie. He's just talking about people. He's mad at all these people on Twitter typing away, being like, "Oh, Elliot Page shouldn't be in the movie. Hold up. There were no trains. Hold up. Why you got an Indian guy posing at blah, blah, blah." I knew he wasn't talking about me. I was like, he's wrong about this criticism. Like, that's not true criticism. And it's not true criticism. It's not. That's why he's sitting here being like, oh, well, I was actually talking about amateur critics. Well, those aren't really critics. Those are, in my opinion, that's not criticism. That's nitpicking. What he described as like seeing a mechanism and saying how it affects you, and how I was saying that's sympathetic, that's nitpicking.
Professional film criticism, because professional film criticism tends to.
I swear to God, if he says what I said,
the necessity for the mechanisms. So
he's saying
you're looking at
exactly
a
what I
linear
just
frame
said.
Of storytelling created by Hollywood for the last 100 years, that is very effectively universal, and so it is its own language. And that language is understood by people all over the world, which is what's incredible about it. And it is a very, very accessible modern language of storytelling. And it has certain rules, it has conventions. You can break those conventions, you can bend them, you can move them, but you have to be aware of them the whole time.
Yes.
And as I say,
yes,
I'm thinking
I agree.
Amateur criticism when I say that people who
are just nitpicking. It's not criticism; it's called nitpicking. And I don't blame him. He's on the spot. He's in an interview. I think you can interswap those words easily. I understand what he's saying, and I agree with him about amateur criticism.
It invalidates it. That can be true of certain elements,
Yeah.
and film grammar and film language evolves with that. So when a trope becomes too familiar to an audience, then it has to be changed. But we do as filmmakers.
I disagree with that. No, I get what he's saying. Like, that's why Game of Thrones was so popular. I think people were really, really like getting tired of Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, basically like this good versus evil, these like tropes of like always coming out top. And so when like Game of Thrones came out, it was super refreshing that everyone was kind of gray, that the good guy dies, that the bad guys can get away with it, and that it was less about good and evil and more about like just people and being selfish and trying to stay ahead and all that other stuff. So like I do agree once a trope, I think tropes can get watered down, but I'm also firmly in the belief that like most of the time when those tropes get watered down, it's because people are given a bunch of mediocre crap, a bunch of mediocre, like just like silly stuff. Because there's plenty of tropes that go on forever that obviously people don't get tired of. And whenever he's saying people, I'm going to assume he means like the masses, where all the money's at, whatever's trending at the moment. Like whatever is trending for the masses, for the general audience, that's probably what he's talking about. And then if that's the case, then sure, I can agree.
Avail ourselves of that common language. We build on that understanding. Our audience has seen many films.
No.
And they understand that language. And so you're playing with that language. It's the language of genre. It's the language of audience sympathy. It's the language of clarity and of narrative direction and how you guide
The
people through a
only
story.
good in Game of
You're talking
Thrones
about
were the dragons
The relationship to tradition.
and the naked women. And the naked women. Let's not forget about God's gift to man, all right? In some cases, God's curse to man. Let's keep going.
And innovation. Because at some point, the mechanism becomes trite or unusable.
Yeah.
But without the mechanism, you can't really build. You have nothing to
Exactly.
yeah.
You can't. You can't completely have a tabula rasa. You can't.
What are they talking about with mechanisms?
You have to make
Another
your
example is like
choices in terms
tropes.
of how am I orienting a story? So, for example, one of my first films, Memento, was a story that I structured in reverse chronologically. But what I retained was a very, very clear and simple 3-act structure. So the structure of the film, as it's received by the audience, is very, very conventional. But the chronology is unconventional. And so those are the
He gave a very good example and a very good analogy that I totally agree with.
choices you make. That's one example where you say, okay, I need this to be extremely familiar underneath so that I can change what's on the surface. And that's a continual mechanism that's evolving and that you're working with the whole time.
It can be tough.
I mean,
It can be very tough because there are times, especially like when I'm writing reviews, I have to write reviews kind of exactly what Christopher Nolan's saying is like I have to use the mechanism of like a persuasive essay when I write my reviews, or like even whenever I do my shorts, like my short review for The Odyssey was like it got like 22,000 views, right? But it was like I still had to follow this persuasive argument and I still had to attempt to follow these rules while condensing everything within like 1 minute. And those mechanisms give you a foundation so that like whatever you put inside of it, however nonsensical, however crazy, however weird it might be, it allows it to stay sturdy and it allows it to be something that is essentially digestible and familiar for the audience. So I totally agree with him. I do not think that. So whenever I will say this, so whenever I'm criticizing someone like Christopher Nolan, and the things that I've been criticizing him about, like in this video, is the fact that he is attempting to use a mechanism, but he has warped it so far beyond what it's actually supposed to be used for that the mechanism just no longer works. But he says, "Well, I did the thing," and it's kind of like whenever you're bugging your little sister and you're saying, "I'm not touching you. I'm not like you are." Okay, you are technically not touching me, but the whole point is that you're annoying the shit out of me, and you're doing it on purpose. And that's kind of what Christopher Nolan is doing. He's like, "Well, I didn't break the mechanism. I didn't break." And it's like, no, but you're using a hammer to try to unscrew something. Like it's just not working, dude.
I'm thinking like a nerdy doctoral student who has to write a dissertation. I mean, writing on Plato or Aristotle is the most difficult thing to do. Just like making a film on the Odyssey, it's been done, for thousands of years. And making Memento, you can make it whatever you want. Nobody knows if the character. They won't have a complaint about your adaptive choices. And I'm curious, you've said before, after Oppenheimer, with the success of Oppenheimer, you felt like you've had a kind of liberty to do whatever you want or actualize what you want to do. And you chose the most difficult dissertation to write if you're getting a PhD.
I mean, in some ways, but in other ways, there's something I do think your question is slightly missing, which is that what I'm trying to say is that when you make Memento, yes, it's a character I've created, and people won't criticize it on that, but it's in a tradition of...
No. She's not missing anything. I think he's trying to correct her to save his ass right now. I genuinely think he's trying to save his own ass right now.
Noirish, amnesia-based noir fiction, and people judge it by those terms. So even though on the surface of things, nominally, a film is a different or an original creation, the audience and critics and everything, they tend to judge it in relation to previous examples.
But judging a genre is completely different than judging an adaptation. And this is what I mean by he was trying to cover her ass, because she called him out. She said, look, you're doing something very difficult. You're adapting someone else's work. They've already set the standard, right? A genre is more of loosey goosey. You can play with the rules a little bit more. A genre doesn't have a specific character you have to use. Maybe they have a stereotype of a character you have to use, like mystery thrillers. A lot of mystery thrillers usually have a detective of some sort. So, but how does your detective look? How does your detective act? Those can all be a little bit more flimsy. Maybe your character's not a detective, but they still have to act like a detective, right? They're still like Sherlock Holmes was a private investigator of some sort. He wasn't necessarily working for the police force, right? So he's being intellectually dishonest right now. He's talking in bad faith. You cannot say those are apples and oranges. You are adapting something specifically. You're not just adapting a genre. The Odyssey isn't a genre. The Odyssey is a specific story that you have taken and you have morphed it into your own viewpoints. Or if it's not your own viewpoints, because let's be honest, Christopher Nolan has always been very conservative. He's morphed it into a very modern audience viewpoint. I'm genre Wick and they fucked my wife. Phrasing. You know what I like? It's right. That's right. Right? Like John Wick action movies look so different from one another because they are a genre. But if you put the Odyssey next to other Odyssey movies, it's gonna look the freaking same. Because you're not doing it off of a genre. They're gonna have the same characters, they're gonna have the same plot. The narrative is going to be a bit different because that's whenever people start getting all little creative. They start throwing some spices in there. They start experimenting, thinking they can put a little bit of chemical X in it. But that's just not the case.
Of the genre, which is an advantage and a disadvantage. And so, yes, when you adapt Batman, for example, there are a lot of people who are going to say, well, hang on, why is it this way? Why is it that way? And everything else. But even with an original story, it's the same thing. It's like, well, hang on. Why
it's not the same thing.
The protagonist in this way. Why has
it's not the same thing.
Done that, and they're judging it relative to the overall cultural flow.
It's not. You can't. He's being intellectually dishonest. This is stupid.
The movement of
you're trying too hard. Just drop it, dude. Just drop it. You fucked up. You fucked up.
Because it's just something you have to be aware of as a filmmaker. It's an advantage and it's a disadvantage.
Yeah, with the Odyssey, you've dragged the classicists to as hounds behind your back. I guess final question.
Cook them.
What are the gods? Are they figments of imagination, or are they necessary noble?
They're the environments and how, based on how he did it, they're based on how people perceive the environment. They're everything.
They are reality. And what I found interesting about looking at the idea of gods and how to address it, the way I got interested in addressing it is from the point of view of people who would have lived in that time, for whom in a pre-scientific era, evidence of divinity is everywhere. And so the existence of gods is not an article of faith, it's simple reality. So thunder and lightning is God speaking to them.
I saw your movie.
The state of the ocean is moved by the gods. They have no other explanation for it. And so just as we accept things from science as absolute fact, the earth is round and we travel around the sun, we can't know these things. We take them as faith because they're presented to us as facts. The same would be true.
Holy shit. I get what he's saying, but that is a terrible example. Holy crap. We know them as true, but what the fuck? No, the world is round. That is not a faith-based. Okay, a better example is like cell phones, right? Like, I don't know how a cell phone works. I'm not saying that but I'm basically putting my faith in the person who designed the cell phone that it's going to work for me. Okay, that's a better example than we just put our faith into science. Like, and even my example isn't even the point. I get the point that he's making. I'm nitpicking. That was so dumb.
Of the theological structure that explains nature.
Did he just compare Pac-Man to the Odyssey?
Real,
he might as well have. He really did.
They are being projected by the people.
Oh, that's cool.
They're being projected by the people.
For we moderns.
I think, in a way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you.
I don't think my headphones charged last night, so I think they're trying to die on me.
Yeah.
That's not good. Holy crap, she cooked Christopher Nolan over the Odyssey. He doesn't even realize it. Dude, hats off to the doctor student podcaster Zing. Dude, she cooked him. She really did cook him. Holy crap, what a great interview. She did a great job. And you know what, I'm really happy? This was an interview, not a debate. That it's important for you to understand that, because an interviewer is going to ask a question and let the person talk. They're not going to argue with them. I want to debate these people. I want to debate Christopher Nolan. But I think there's a lot of value in just letting someone talk. What's that saying is don't interrupt someone who's hurting themselves, or don't interrupt your opponent when they're failing, or something like that. My gosh, great interview. Great job. I loved it. I'm glad we got to hear Christopher Nolan speak, and she told fantastic questions that let us delve into the mind of Christopher Nolan.